Picture this. A woman kneels on her kitchen floor, crying so hard she cannot breathe. She is not crying from joy. She is crying because the church she trusted for 30 years just called the police on her. This is the woman who gave them $4 million. Why would the people she loved most turn against her? Stay with me, because this story will break your heart. Her name was Doris Whitfield. She was 61 years old. She lived in a small town in Ohio, in a house with a leaking roof and a car that barely started in winter. Doris was not rich. She was not lucky. She was a church cleaner. Every Sunday, she arrived before dawn to sweep the floors and polish the pews. She did this for free for 30 years because she believed it was her duty to God. Doris raised 3 children alone. Her husband left when the youngest was only 2. She worked double shifts at a diner to keep the lights on. Picture her, standing on tired feet for 12 hours, smiling at strangers, counting coins for bus fare. Her children grew up watching her sacrifice everything. They never once heard her complain. Every Friday night, Doris bought one lottery ticket. It cost $2. It was her only luxury. She would sit at her kitchen table, close her eyes, and pray. She never prayed to win big. She only asked for enough to fix her roof. That was her whole dream. A dry roof over her head. Her closest friend was a woman named Carol, who sat beside her in church every week. Carol knew about the leaking roof. Carol knew about the aching feet from the diner. Carol also knew something else. She knew Doris trusted the church with her whole heart. That trust would soon become a weapon. Picture Doris on an average Sunday morning, years before any of this happened. She wakes at 4 in the morning, when the whole street is silent. She walks to the church alone, keys jingling in her tired hand, breath visible in the cold air. She unlocks the heavy wooden doors and steps inside the empty sanctuary. Sunlight has not even touched the stained glass yet. She sweeps every row by herself, hums old hymns, and talks quietly to God like he is sitting right beside her. This was her peace. This was the one place in the world where she felt important, valued, and safe. Nobody paid her for this work. She did it because it made her feel like her hard life had meaning beyond just survival. Her son Marcus worked construction, often going weeks without steady pay. Her daughter Renee struggled with medical bills after a car accident left her with a permanent limp. Doris carried their worries silently, along with her own, never once asking anyone for help. Neighbors described her as the kind of woman who would give away her last meal if someone else looked hungrier. That kindness had defined her entire life. It was the very thing that made her beloved in her small town, and later, the very thing that made her an easy target. On a rainy Tuesday evening, Doris checked her ticket at the small store near her home. Her hands began to shake. She checked the numbers 3 times. She checked them a 4th time. Then she screamed so loud that the store owner ran out from the back room, thinking someone was hurt. Doris had won $11 million. Picture her standing in that small store, tickets shaking in her fingers, tears running down her face. She called her daughter first. She could barely speak. She just kept saying, the roof, we can fix the roof now. Her children rushed to her house within the hour. They hugged her so tight she could not breathe. For one single night, the Whitfield family felt like the luckiest people on earth. They sat together at that same kitchen table, laughing, crying, dreaming about a future that finally felt safe. Marcus kept repeating the same words over and over. He said, "Mom, you never have to work again." Renee cried so hard she could barely speak. She kept touching the ticket, as if touching it would prove it was real and not some cruel dream. Neighbors saw the lights on late that night and wondered what was happening. Nobody outside the family knew yet. For a few precious hours, the win belonged only to them, untouched by the outside world. Doris later called it the happiest night of her whole life. She did not sleep at all. She sat by her kitchen window, watching the sun rise over her cracked driveway, thinking about everything she could finally fix. She thought about her mother, long past, who had raised her the same way, with almost nothing and endless love. The next morning, reporters from the local news station arrived outside her home. Doris stood on her porch in her worn housecoat, smiling nervously into the cameras. She told them simply, "I just want to fix my roof and help my church." The clip went viral within days. Doris planned simple things. She wanted to fix her roof. She wanted to buy her son a used truck for his construction job. She wanted to pay off her daughter's hospital bills. And she wanted to thank God, the way she always thanked God, by giving back to her church. She told her pastor the very next Sunday. She stood in front of the whole congregation, voice trembling with joy. She promised to donate half of everything, over $5 million, to build a new church building. The room erupted in applause. People cried. People hugged her. Nobody knew what was coming. At first, everything felt like a miracle. The pastor, a man named Reverend Michael Coyle, called her a blessing sent from heaven. He organized a special prayer service just for her. He told the congregation that Doris was proof that God rewards the faithful. Doris felt more loved than she had ever felt in her whole life. But love built on money is a fragile thing. Within weeks, small changes began. Reverend Coyle started calling her every single day. He asked about her health, her family, her plans. At first it felt caring. Slowly, it started to feel like control. He suggested she move the church donation forward, before the roof repair, before the truck for her son. He said the building project needed a fast start. Doris, always eager to please, agreed. She transferred $2 million that same month, months earlier than she had planned. Her son Marcus grew uneasy. He noticed his mother seemed tired all the time, distracted, always on the phone with the pastor. He asked her to slow down, to talk to a lawyer first. Doris brushed him off. She said, "This is church business, Marcus, not yours." That single sentence created the first crack in her family. Marcus felt pushed away from his own mother, in the very moment she needed protection the most. Picture a son watching his mother drift further from her family and closer to strangers wearing kind smiles. By April, only 3 months after the win, Reverend Coyle had visited Doris's house 11 separate times. He always brought small gifts, flowers, homemade bread, framed scripture verses. Each visit ended with another gentle request for money. He asked for funds to expand the youth program. He asked for funds to repair the church parking lot. He asked for funds to help struggling families in the congregation, families Doris never actually met or verified. Every request felt urgent. Every request felt righteous. Doris kept a small notebook where she tracked her giving, out of habit from her diner days counting tips. By April alone, the notebook showed over $1.2 million given away, far more than she had ever planned to give in her entire first year. Meanwhile, word spread through the small town. Everyone knew Doris Whitfield had won the lottery. Old classmates called her. Distant cousins she had not spoken to in 20 years suddenly remembered her birthday. People she barely knew started showing up at her door with sad stories and open hands. Carol, her closest friend, changed too. She began hinting about her own struggles, her sick husband, her mounting debts. Doris, always generous, gave her $50,000 without a second thought. Carol thanked her with tears, then quietly stopped inviting her to lunch. By the 3rd month, Doris had given away nearly $4 million. Some went to the church, some went to friends, some went to people claiming to be old co-workers from the diner. She kept telling herself this was what God wanted. She kept telling herself she was doing good. Then the real trouble started. Reverend Coyle proposed a new idea. He said the church needed a bigger vision, not just a building, but a whole ministry campus. He asked Doris to sign over control of an investment account so the church could manage her remaining money wisely. Doris hesitated for the first time. Something in her gut felt wrong. But Reverend Coyle looked her in the eyes and said, "Do you trust God, Doris? Do you trust me?" She had spent 30 years trusting this church. She signed the papers that same afternoon. That signature would destroy everything. The account held nearly $3 million, the last of her untouched winnings. Within weeks, church leaders began making decisions without telling her. Money moved between accounts. Paperwork grew confusing. Doris asked questions and received vague answers about faith and patience. Her daughter Renee finally convinced her to see a lawyer in June, 7 months after the win. The lawyer reviewed the documents and went pale. He told Doris the account gave the church almost total control. He said she had, in simple terms, signed away her own money. Picture Doris sitting in that lawyer's office, hands trembling exactly like they had the night she checked her winning ticket. Except this time, there was no joy, only fear. She realized the people she trusted most had taken advantage of her faith. She confronted Reverend Coyle directly. He denied any wrongdoing. He told her the money was being used exactly as promised for God's work. When she demanded records, he grew cold. He told her that questioning the church was questioning her own faith. The new church building, the one she had funded with $2 million, sat half-finished, with no clear timeline for completion. Contractors said payments had stopped arriving months earlier. Nobody could explain where large amounts of the money had gone. Doris tried to get her $3 million back from the investment account. The church's lawyers fought her every step of the way. They claimed the donation was final and irreversible under the signed agreement. What started as an act of faith turned into a brutal legal battle. There were other betrayals too, smaller but just as painful. A distant cousin named Wesley borrowed $80,000 to start a used car business. He promised to repay her within a year. He vanished completely, leaving no phone number and no forwarding address behind. A childhood friend from the diner years asked for $40,000 to save her home from foreclosure. Doris gave it gladly, remembering nights they had worked side by side for minimum wage. She never heard from that friend again after the money arrived in her account. Even a young man from the church youth group, someone Doris had once tutored in reading, asked her for college tuition money. She paid nearly $30,000 toward his education. He dropped out after one semester and never spoke to her again. Each name in her small notebook eventually became a quiet wound. She started crossing out names instead of writing new ones, tears smudging the ink as she realized how many people had simply used her kindness and disappeared without a word of thanks. The final blow came in October of that first year. Doris discovered that nearly $900,000 from the church investment account had been transferred into a private business account controlled personally by Reverend Coyle, with no church board approval on record. By the second year, most of the $11 million was gone. Legal fees, donations, family loans that were never repaid, and unexplained church expenses had drained almost everything. Doris was left with less than $300,000 and a roof that still leaked. Imagine winning $11 million and still living under a leaking roof 2 years later. That is exactly what happened to Doris Whitfield. The dream that once felt like a miracle had become a cruel joke, played on the one person who only ever wanted to help others. The court case dragged through for over a year. Doris spent nearly $200,000 just on legal fees, money she desperately needed. Meanwhile, her family fractured completely. Marcus stopped speaking to her for months. Still angry, she had ignored his warnings. Court hearings were held once a month, sometimes less. Each time, Doris sat in a cold hallway outside the courtroom, clutching a worn Bible she had carried since childhood. She said the waiting felt worse than any physical pain she had ever experienced. The church hired 3 lawyers from a large firm 2 states away. Doris had only one lawyer, a kind but overworked man named Gregory Ash, who took her case at a reduced rate because her story had moved him deeply. He often worked nights just to keep up. Reporters started covering the case as it dragged on. Headlines called her the lottery winner betrayed by her own church. Strangers online argued about who was really to blame, some blaming the pastor, others cruelly blaming Doris herself for being naive. She read some of those comments late at night, alone in her kitchen. Some called her stupid. Some called her a saint who got what she deserved for trusting blindly. Each comment felt like another small cut, added to wounds that were already too deep to count. During one hearing, Reverend Coyle sat across the courtroom from her, wearing an expensive suit she had unknowingly helped pay for. He did not look at her once. Doris later said that moment hurt worse than losing the money itself. The court case finally ended in a partial settlement. Doris recovered about $600,000 from the church's remaining assets. Reverend Coyle resigned quietly, moving to another state before the final ruling. No criminal charges were ever filed against him. Her health suffered badly during those 2 years of stress. She developed high blood pressure and severe anxiety. Friends who visited her said she barely resembled the joyful woman who once swept church floors at dawn, singing hymns under her breath. Her relationship with Marcus slowly healed, but it was never the same. He moved back into her life carefully, like someone testing broken ice on a frozen lake. Renee, her daughter, became her main support, driving her to court dates and doctor appointments for 2 straight years. Marcus later admitted he blamed himself too, for not pushing harder in those early months. He said watching his mother sign away her security felt like watching a slow accident he could not stop. That guilt stayed with him long after the case finally ended. Renee gave up part of her own work schedule to care for her mother during the worst months. She said she barely recognized the strong woman who raised her replaced instead by someone who flinched every time the phone rang, afraid of more bad news. The youngest grandchild, only 6 years old at the time, once asked Doris why she looked so sad all the time now. Doris later said that question broke something inside her chest, a reminder of how much this ordeal had taken from every person she loved. Today, Doris lives quietly on the outskirts of that same small town. She fixed her roof, finally, using the last of the settlement money. She does not attend the church she once served for 30 years. She says walking past its doors still makes her chest tighten with pain. She sold her remaining stake in the unfinished church building for far less than it was worth. The building itself was eventually completed by a different congregation, with no mention of the woman whose donation started it all. Her name was quietly erased from the story. People in town still whisper about her sometimes. Some call her foolish for trusting so easily. Others call her a victim of people who twisted her faith against her. Doris herself refuses to see it that way. She says she does not regret being generous, only who she was generous toward. She still keeps that same small kitchen table where the family once celebrated her win. She says she cannot bring herself to replace it, even though the wood is scratched and the legs wobble slightly. It reminds her of the one perfect night before everything changed. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, she takes out that old notebook filled with crossed-out names and unpaid debts. She does not read it out of anger anymore. She reads it as a reminder of who she used to be, before fear replaced her natural instinct to trust. So why does this keep happening to lottery winners again and again? Psychologists say sudden wealth creates something called sudden wealth syndrome. The brain simply cannot process that much change that fast. Old instincts of trust and generosity do not disappear, even when danger appears. People like Doris are not foolish. They are simply human. For decades, she survived by trusting her community, her church, her friends. That same trust, which once helped her survive hardship, became the exact weakness that predators learned to exploit. Studies on lottery winners show something shocking. A large number of major winners report feeling less happy 1 year later than they did before winning. Money does not erase pain. Sometimes it simply hands pain a bigger stage to perform on. Researchers who study sudden wealth say victims often describe the same pattern. First comes excitement. Then comes pressure from everyone around them. Then comes guilt for saying no. Then comes exhaustion from constantly defending their own decisions to people they love. Doris told one interviewer that the hardest part was not losing the money. It was losing her belief that people loved her simply for who she was. Once the money appeared, she said she could never again be fully sure of anyone's true intentions. Experts say the first 90 days after a big win are the most dangerous. This is when emotions run highest and judgment runs lowest. Financial advisors recommend total silence at first, no public announcements, no rush donations, no signatures without independent legal advice. Financial counselors who work with lottery winners often recommend a simple rule. Wait 1 full year before giving away large sums to anyone, even family, even church. That single year of patience could have completely changed the outcome of Doris Whitfield's story. Doris did none of these things, not because she was weak, but because nobody ever warned her. Nobody sat her down and explained how quickly love can turn into leverage when large sums of money enter a relationship. She learned this lesson the hardest way possible. This story is not really about a lottery. It is about how easily trust can be turned into a trap. It is about how the people closest to us can sometimes cause the deepest wounds, especially when money enters the picture. Doris learned this lesson at the cost of almost everything she had. Think about the people in your own life for a moment. Think about how quickly kindness can be mistaken for weakness by the wrong person. Doris never stopped being kind. She simply learned, painfully, that kindness must come with caution attached. Her story spread far beyond her small Ohio town. Other lottery winners reached out to her after reading the news, sharing their own painful stories of family betrayal and lost fortunes. Doris now spends some of her time quietly listening to strangers who finally understand her pain. If you ever find yourself with sudden money, remember her story. Slow down before you sign anything. Question even the people you love the most. Protect yourself first, so you can actually help others later, the way Doris always dreamed of doing. Doris Whitfield still believes in God. She just no longer believes that faith should be handed over blindly. even to people wearing robes and holding scripture. Her story is a warning, wrapped in heartbreak, meant for anyone who ever dreams of winning it all. If this story moved you, imagine how many people out there are living through something similar right now, quietly, without anyone watching. Share this video so someone else might slow down before making the same mistake Doris made. Somewhere tonight, another winner is opening a bottle of champagne, dreaming about a brighter future. We can only hope their story ends differently than Doris Whitfield's did. Thank you for watching until the very end.